Welcome everyone to yet another round of our weekly lecture series with the Humanist Association of San Diego. Today we're going to talk about ethics and ethical culture. A lot has happened in this last week. A lot has happened in terms of politics, society, and culture in the United States. We had another unfolding of the democratic process with the presidential election. There are a lot of things to meditate on, considering over the last several years, our country has become quite fragmented. We've had social media promoting echo chambers that we find ourselves stuck in through a series of algorithms that give us what we like to hear and avoid us from what we don't particularly care to hear. We find ourselves turned against each other with a great license from who should otherwise be our political and moral leaders. And it's time to come back together. It's time to find some grace, some humility, and realize that we are all in this together. If we look at the presidency, we have to look at the presidency in terms of other presidents and other presidential candidates. And we have to look at the most recent several examples of people who've run for office and didn't quite make it. And what we see is we see graciousness, we see humility, and we see when things start becoming obvious that a higher calling to higher norms of being Americans and working for a shared future come into play. We see candidates who say, we gave it our best. They just did a better job. And we're going to throw our support behind the next person to serve in this office, because when they succeed, we succeed. That didn't happen on Tuesday night. On Tuesday night, the President of the United States, during an election, while votes that were cast that day were being counted, said that the election was rigged and that the counting had to stop. Even though in the past, things got quite contentious, we saw sportsmanship. We're not seeing sportsmanship right now. And we don't have to fall into that ourselves. We don't have to fall into these undemocratic posturings because of feeling let down or even celebrating. It's not necessarily the best thing to be a sore winner. It's not necessarily the best thing to be a sore winner. And when we're looking at the current situation before us, we find ourselves getting angry with the other side, thinking that political choices tend to be based out of reason and rationality, when in fact, that's not how people make political choices. People are socialized to be in one particular party. And the way that people operate is that people know who to trust, and that's how we get our information. We know who to trust. We get our information from those individuals on who the other side is. Then we look at what the other side supposedly supports. Then we get a feeling and we rationalize backwards. That's how political cognition works. It's more of a team sport than making a balance sheet. And if these acts, these political acts and choices aren't made by just deliberative reasoning, just saying that someone is wrong and they've made a wrong choice and they're a bad person over it, doesn't seem to fit. It just doesn't seem to fit. And a lot of us are burnt out. These last 4 years have been rather traumatic for many of us. And when we're looking at these different constituent political elements, we should have an open mind, because they are our neighbors, they are our friends, they are our family members. And we have to get along. So this isn't the time to be a sore winner or a sore loser. So everyone, thank you for joining us for our weekly lecture series. Today we have an incredible guest. This guest has joined us in the past for our Southern California Secular Humanist Conference. He's been an indefatigable advocate for humanist values. His name is James Croft. He is the outreach director of the Ethical Society of St. Louis, one of the largest humanist congregations in the world. In that capacity, he represents the Ethical Society and humanism in the St. Louis community and beyond, speaking on panels, giving workshops, and taking to the streets in defense of humanist values. James holds an MA from the University of Cambridge and a Doctorate of Education from the Harvard Graduate School of Education, where he studied human development. He is an in-demand public speaker, an engaging teacher, and a passionate activist for human rights. James was raised on Shakespeare, Sagan, and Star Trek, and is a proud gay humanist. And as we've continued reaching out and looking into religious humanism with our friends from Kahal Am, San Diego's humanistic Judaism community, let's explore this concept of religious humanism. Ethical culture is an amazing version of religious humanism, and I'd like to know more about it. James, welcome to the Humanist Association of San Diego.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much, Jason, for your lovely welcome and your very fulsome introduction. I don't feel that indefatigable. After this week, I feel very fatigued, but nonetheless, it's a great pleasure to be able to join you. One of the unexpected benefits of this COVID time is the opportunity to virtually visit many communities that I wouldn't be able to visit normally so easily. So it's a pleasure to be with you and to see some of you who I saw in my last visit again. So hello again, if we met in person last time I was out on the West Coast. I'm now going to share my little presentation. What I'm going to do today is give you a very brief outline of what an ethical society is, why we exist, why we do what we do, some history of the movement and its philosophical basis, and then take your questions, because I often find for humanist groups like this, people have 100 questions. And so I'd be really willing to answer any of those questions that you have. This is the Ethical Society of St. Louis, where I was until June the outreach director, where I'm now the senior leader. This is our second building. It was built just over 50 years ago to house our congregation. And that's what an ethical society is fundamentally. It's a congregation brought together around shared values, not shared religious beliefs. We have a huge range of programs. We offer many of the same programs as a traditional religious congregation, but our main community meeting is a meeting on Sunday morning that we call Platform, in which we listen to and hopefully inspiring talk, sort of like a sermon. There's me giving one of them. It's not always me. We invite other speakers too very regularly to present to us. We enjoy music to lift our spirits and to celebrate human diversity and creativity. We support each other through life, providing community when people need it. We have social programs to help us enjoy life together, like these members of our youth group are doing here. We engage in activism to promote our values and march for justice. We celebrate the turning of the seasons, giving shape and direction to life. Here, one of our young people is celebrating, I guess, Pirate Mustache Christmas Day. Not sure what that celebration is, but it looks like they're having a good time. We mark special moments like the turning of the year. We raise our children to have strong moral values. And we have a Sunday Ethical Education for Kids program to do just that. It teaches children to think for themselves, to make good decisions, and is non-dogmatic, presenting many different religious perspectives for consideration. We recognize major life transitions like weddings and the births of children. We remember the dead, celebrating the lives they led and the impact they had on us. Ethical societies are, in short, and this is the simplest way that I can put it, churches without God. We provide everything that a traditional religious congregation would provide without prayer, traditional ritual, dogma, or scripture. So far, I think it's pretty easy to understand. But very often when I talk about ethical societies to groups which are not familiar with them, I get a whole range of questions. And so I'd like to preempt some of those questions and try and answer them now. People often ask me, if we don't have a God and if we don't do traditional religion, what do we believe? Fundamentally, we believe that all people are members of one human family, that all people are equal in dignity and worth, and deserve to be treated as fully equal participants in the world community. We are non-theistic, not dogmatically atheistic. That distinction can be a fine one, so let me pull it out a little bit for you. Our members can believe what they wish about God, about the afterlife, and other traditional religious questions. We view that as a matter of individual liberty and freedom of thought. We promote no religious creed or dogma which members must sign up to in order to join our community. Rather, we celebrate people's individual perspectives on those questions and focus all our programming and attention on this life we share, not on any life which may come after this one. If there is a life after this one, we can build another ethical society there. In this ethical society, we focus on this life that every human being enjoys. The term ethical society is not meant to mean that we have figured out how to be ethical. It is not a statement of superiority. It means we are working on becoming more ethical together. It is an aspiration, the journey we are on, not a destination which we've already arrived at. People often want to know, where did ethical societies come from? And this takes a little bit longer to answer because it's an interesting and philosophically rich story. The first ethical society was founded by this guy, a man called Felix Adler. He was the son of a prominent Reform rabbi in New York, and he was expected to succeed his father as rabbi. So they sent him to Germany to study religion. But like many people who leave for university and get away from their parents' influence, when he got there, he took a little bit of a sidestep and also started studying a lot of secular philosophy as well. And under the influence of his teachers in Germany, he became a neo-Kantian thinker. Then he returned to the United States. And in 1873, when he was 22 years old, he returned from his studies in Germany to give his first sermon at his father's synagogue, Temple Emmanuel in New York. Now, the anticipation for this first sermon of a prodigal son returned must have been very great. Adler had great skills as an orator, skills which would soon see him draw overflowing crowds to Carnegie Hall to hear him speak and see his addresses printed in the New York Times. And those skills would have been on display that day at Temple Emmanuel. So what did this short, slight young man, already with a receding hairline and a high forehead, I can empathize, his heart fired with the spiritual energy of Emerson, his head swimming with the ideas of Immanuel Kant, what would he say to his father's congregation? He called his sermon The Judaism of the Future, and in it he outlined a radical new departure for Judaism, which centered on universal human ethics and right relations between people, rather than on the rituals, symbols, and ethnic identity of traditional Judaism. He said, "We discard the narrow spirits of exclusion and loudly proclaim that Judaism was not given to the Jews alone, but that its destiny is to embrace in one great moral state the whole family of man. This religion, not confined to the church and synagogue alone, shall sit by the judge in the tribunal, by the counselor in the halls of legislation, shall stand by the merchant in his warehouse, by the workman at his work." He argued that Judaism and all religions were fundamentally about ethics, and that Jews needed to embrace that and create a new understanding of that faith, which was focused on ethics alone. So radical was Adler's vision of Judaism that, in the words of ethical culture leader Arthur Dobrin, in essence, he reformed Judaism to a point that it was no longer Judaism. And to cap it all off, he did not once mention God. After the sermon, the board of trustees of the temple summoned Adler to explain himself. Why had he not mentioned God in his sermon? Did he even believe in God? Despite his attempts to explain his philosophical and religious convictions, Adler was not given the job as his father's replacement. Indeed, he was never invited to speak at his father's synagogue again. But that moment, that turning point in Adler's life, led him to build something new. He founded the first ethical society. Ours is a movement then born in New York. It's a truly homegrown religious, ethical, and philosophical movement. And this is the New York Society for Ethical Culture, the mothership of the movement. It is, as you can see, an enormous building. And if you can imagine to the left of this image, across the road that you can see this school bus going down, that's Central Park. So this is a city block-sized building on Central Park West that was built through the extraordinary charisma and philosophical clarity of Felix Adler. He got people to convince him to be convinced to give enough money to build this extraordinary building. I'm not sure if anyone has ever been there, but it's an absolutely stunning temple to humanism, and I always feel very reverent whenever I go there. And from this base, Adler expanded his movement that very quickly became something much more like what it is today than what he initially imagined when he spoke at his father's temple. It disconnected entirely from its Jewish roots. It had no Jewish elements whatsoever. In fact, he was very strict about taking out all traditional religious elements from their services because he wanted everyone to be able to participate regardless of their religious beliefs. It was staunchly non-theistic. Adler himself was rather scathing about the idea of a personal God. He didn't think that it was possibly intellectually sustainable, but it was also very strong in its commitment that people could join if they did believe in God. He was very open to the fact that other people wouldn't share his metaphysics. What was important to him was that people shared his commitment to ethics, to good behavior. And from that commitment stemmed one of our most oft recited mottos in ethical culture, deed before creed. And that expresses the idea that we focus on ethical behavior more than we focus on anyone's particular religious beliefs. And from this mothership, Adler expanded his movement across the United States and across many other countries in the world. There were ethical societies all across the United Kingdom at one time, and in Germany and in South America. He was an incredibly charismatic person. Everywhere he went, new ethical societies popped up, including the ethical society I serve in St. Louis, Missouri. So what is ethical culture? It is a humanistic religion or philosophy, depending on how you like your humanism, which puts people at the center, which has as its highest ideal the worth and dignity of every person. It is a way of life which calls adherents to consider with our every action whether we are promoting the best in other people and thereby in ourselves. It is a movement which seeks to ethicize relationships at every level of society and which will not rest until we have a more ethical culture. Today, there are about 25 ethical societies still remaining around the United States, and the work of all ethical societies coordinated by a national body called the American Ethical Union. Now, for some of you involved in humanism at the national level or even the international level, the phrase ethical union might be familiar to you because until recently, the major national humanist organization was called the International Humanist and Ethical Union. And those two words at the end are a signal of the incredible influence that ethical culture had on building the institutional humanist movement worldwide. What is today the American Humanist Association, what is today Humanists International, once known as the International Humanist and Ethical Union, what is today Humanists UK, once the British Humanist Association. None of those organizations would exist in their current form without ethical culture, because ethical culture was right at the heart of starting every single one of them. So if your group is an AHA chapter, you can thank in part that prematurely balding rabbi who had this spiritual insight that became the ethical culture movement. In its day, ethical humanism was one of the most successful institutional spreaders of humanism that the world has ever seen. That is not the case anymore, but our legacy can still be seen in many existing humanist institutions around the country and around the world. Our movement also has a long and proud history of social justice work. We founded the Visiting Nurses Association, the first free kindergarten in New York, one of the first in the entire United States. We helped found the NAACP and the ACLU. Closer to home in my native St. Louis, not native St. Louis, my adopted St. Louis, members of the Ethical Society of St. Louis helped desegregate lunch counters across the city, working with local civil rights leaders in that flowering of the civil rights movement. We have a long history of support of the LGBTQIA plus community. We have quotes ordained. We don't ordain, we certify. We've certified openly gay leaders of ethical societies for many decades now. And we have connections through our ethical societies with countless local activists and service organizations. And now I'd like to preempt a few misconceptions that people often have about ethical societies. Firstly, we are a community. We are not a cult. We have culture in the name of our movement, but we are actually more like an anti-cult than a cult. We promote individual autonomy and free thinking, and we reject entirely the extreme forms of social pressure which cults use to brainwash their members. We want you to use your brain. We don't want to brainwash you. We are democratic congregations. We have no authoritarian hierarchy. We don't have a pope at the top of it. Everything tells everyone what to do. Many ethical societies are run completely by their members and do not have any professional staff at all. Those, like mine, with professional clergy leaders, select them democratically after a vote of the congregation. So no one gets to tell everyone what to believe, and no one can force an ethical society to accept leadership they do not want. We don't have a scripture, but we don't spend a lot of time denigrating other people's scriptures either. We don't believe that there is any written text that has special preference above all others, nor do we deny that there might be spiritual, ethical, and existential insight to be gained from religious scriptures. Rather, we view all texts as written by human beings without divine inspiration, and we see them as potential sources of wisdom alongside all other written texts. This one's mainly for people I'm trying to convince to join the ethical society, but I like to ensure people that we are not after their money. We are not like some mega churches who are gathering huge amounts of money in order to support the luxury lifestyles of their clergy, although sometimes I do wish we were. We don't even require people to give money to join the community. We ask that everyone, when they join, submit a pledge form to indicate their support of the community's values, but that pledge form need not include any dollar amount. It can be zero. We're open to everyone, regardless of their financial situation. What we are, what all the remaining ethical societies are, is a network of humanist congregations offering the best parts of traditional religions without reference to God or the supernatural, without deference to any dogmatic or scriptural authority. We gather to be human together. And that is what an ethical society is. Now, I imagine you have a ton of questions. So I'm just going to shut up for a bit and ask people who have questions to ask them. But I will warn you before you ask your question that I take questions very seriously and tend to try and answer them at great length. So if you want to ask a question, get in there quickly because you don't want to miss your chance.
I don't have a question. This is Margaret Downey, but I have extreme compliments to the Ethical Society because I've been working with the Philadelphia Ethical Society for 10 years. When Hugh Taft Morales became the leader, we decided to do programming together. And it's been an absolute fantastic journey. And every year we do our Tree of Knowledge. This was going to be our 10th anniversary. And unfortunately, we have to do it via Zoom this time. So please, if you want to meet Hugh Taft Morales, the Ethical Society leader of Philadelphia, tune in to our December 12th event and see him perform. He performs guitar and sings. He's fantastic. And I wish I lived nearby you, James, because I'm sure you and I would be working together as well.
You bet. Thank you for mentioning that event. I might tune in myself.
Great.
Hugh is wonderful, and I know that he really enjoys working with you as well.
And I would encourage every leader to contact their ethical society, their local ethical society, and offer a hand of friendship and cooperation, because these are the most wonderful people I've ever had a pleasure to work with.
That's a dangerously high bar.
James, can I ask a question?
Of course.
About environmental stewardship and some of the values of American humanism, Humanist Manifesto 3 specifically, and where, you know, we, to touch on what Jason said earlier about us all getting along and we're all in together, which has become a kind of a common cliche now. And I think it's easier said than done. And if you have any comments on methodology, which I think we talk a lot about these things philosophically with not a great deal of effort in terms of how we're going to achieve getting along with people that we sometimes really actively disagree with, vehemently disagree with. There's a cancel culture going on, a defriending thing going on, I think. And I don't think it's just me. I think that happens quite a bit. So what do you think about methodology to maintain unity among people we don't really necessarily care for?
So I heard, firstly, it's good to see you. It's been a while. You look
Yeah,
well.
thanks.
I heard, I guess, two potential questions. The first part was something about the environment and Humanist Manifesto 3. And the second part was about this question of how do we kind of get along with people that we disagree with. So let me take the second one first, because I've been writing and thinking a lot about that recently. As a humanist, I'm committed to trying to act in a way that upholds the dignity and worth of every person. That does not mean, I think, that I am also committed to finding common ground obsessively with everybody all the time. Right? That is not necessarily the most important thing to do in every circumstance. And I worry that we have been trying to find common ground with the unacceptable for so long that we've let them get away with so much that the common ground has vanished, right? There isn't a possibility for common ground. And I think that because common ground must be based in a common reality, right? It's a common understanding of truth must be where we start. Then we can argue about the interpretation of truths, but we have to actually agree to start in reality. That's the most fundamental kind of common ground that could potentially exist. And I think we've lost that in our political discussion. I think too many people have been too willing to lie and to ignore reality for too long. And so I actually think the job now is to win, is to defeat the other side. And I know that doesn't sound very humanistic, but actually we need to stand up for truth and say, and ostracize and marginalize liars and cheaters, particularly political cheaters like the ones that we're hopefully kicking out, and make sure there are consequences for their bad behavior. I think they need to be punished. And I think that that's a difficult position to come to when you always want to look for the best in people. But I think that after many years of people telling us that they're willing to do anything in pursuit of their political goals, we have to believe them and treat them accordingly.
Are most people in your society believe in mathematical thinking?
What do you mean by mathematical thinking, Jim? Can you be a bit more specific?
In other words, looking for the truth and not just thinking like an atheist or whatever. They're thinking, like you were saying, there is a reality. It's all, well, there's a whole lot of stuff on the internet about mathematical thinking, where one word means one thing, just like science. And so it seems to me you believe in mathematical thinking or scientific thinking, not just any old thing. There is a reality, you believe in reality. And so it's when you talk to people, you can realize they're not doing mathematical thinking, and you can't agree with anything because, they're often on their own thinking. They got their own group to follow.
I understand your question now. Thank you for clarifying. The short answer is, I hope so. We try and promote that mode of thinking. One of the things we sometimes have to fight against is the sense that because we don't have an established creed, then you can believe what you like. Sometimes I hear my members saying that to potential new members. They say, oh, we don't mind what you believe here. You can believe what you like. And I kind of run over and I say, that's not quite right. It's not like a free-for-all. You don't just get to pick your beliefs out of a hat. We believe in a rigorous process of testing our beliefs against data and trying to figure out what is true. We really are committed to the truth. So when we have this discussion sometimes, because one of our Sunday school's core values is I'm free to question. That's one of them. Great. Next one, I'm free to choose what I believe. that one requires a bit of finesse. And I did a whole talk about what that meant and what it didn't mean, because people sometimes think, well, I can believe whatever thing I want. When this really comes to a head is when our members believe in, some of our members, like people in every group, believe in certain alternative medicines, or not medicines, as I like to call them. And sometimes it causes a lot of friction, because we want to say there's no scientific evidence that works. And they have a different view that's born from their own experience or what have you. And so what we try and promote is the idea that you have to, your beliefs, you have to be responsible for your beliefs, like you have to be responsible for your actions. You have to really think things through and compare it to the evidence and have good reasons for believing what you believe, that you don't just get to pick it just because you want it to be true. So hopefully we do promote that kind of what you call mathematical thinking.
All right, and we have a question from Wes Bertrand, who is the former VP of SIDARI, the San Diego Association for Rational Inquiry.
Cool.
Hello, James.
Hello.
Great to see you. I'm coming to you from Saipan, which is the first day in America. It's way out in the South Pacific, north of Guam.
Wow.
Anyway, I used to live in San Diego, and yeah, I was involved with SIDARI for quite a few years. Keith Taylor was running it then, and we featured a lot of speakers like James Enderdown, and a lot of basically rational inquirers, skeptics, debunkers, and so forth. And I'm wondering on the topic of ethics, how would you define ethics, and whether this particular rubric of ethics includes non-sacrifice of human needs? And as an extension of that, are you familiar with the work of psychologist Marshall Rosenberg and his methodology called nonviolent communication? Because that is a transformational methodology by which to integrate in our consciousness so that we can relate to others in win-win ways without the typical shaming and blaming and the punishment paradigm. And that's kind of related to this organizational model called TEAL, which was outlined by Frederick Laloux in a book called Reinventing Organizations, and that came out in 2014. And he draws from Ken Wilber's ideas about integral theory, and that we need to transcend and include all of these different stages in our culture, basically. So now we're seeing a fight between orange and green, or broken orange and broken green, as he calls it, which is the moderns and the postmodernists. And the next stage would be teal, where we have an integration with including the valuable things of each side and leaving the ones that aren't valuable, so that we can have a society that's based on self-management principles and holistic understandings of each other, as well as a evolutionary purpose, if you will. So this is all a transformational thing with nonviolent communication, teal, and voluntarism, I think, is the missing ingredient here, that we need to have a non-sacrificial ethics in the realm of politics as well. So I'm just curious what your thoughts are on all that.
Okay, that's a lot of things. So let's start with, how do we define ethics or think about ethics? So this is actually a very complicated question, philosophically speaking, and you get different humanist philosophers into a room, and they're going to have a lot of different views on ethics, not just ethics, but meta-ethics too, about how we even think and talk about ethics. And I don't think it's actually necessary, just as it's not necessary to have agreement over metaphysical commitments in order to have agreement over basic ethical values. I don't think it's necessary to have agreement over an ethical framework or a meta-ethical approach in order to have agreement over basic human values. And so we tend actually not programmatically to dive into the deep philosophical questions of ethics too much. We just try and promote basic ethical principles which can help people live their lives. If I was to answer as a philosopher, I would say I'm a ethical naturalist. I think ethics are an embedded part of natural reality, and that the way we make ethical judgments is quite similar to the way we make aesthetic judgments. So for instance, if you ask the question, what makes Hamlet a great play or something, or even is Hamlet a good play, you're going to come up with a set of reasons which are going to be supported hopefully by textual evidences and references to other texts. It's not a subjective account, has an objective element to it because you're referring to concrete aspects of the work. But different people will disagree based on their weighting of the evidence or their use of different pieces of evidence, etc. And the ethics is quite like that it's actually no more mysterious than that. We're just judging ethical material rather than literary material in the case of a play like Hamlet or something like that. But I would have to go through the kind of fundamental building blocks of my doctoral dissertation, and I can't do that in the time that we have in order to explain more than that. I want to say a couple of things. So you mentioned nonviolent communication and then Ken Wilber.
Yes.
I'm skeptical of both, and I will tell you why. Nonviolent communication is very popular within the ethical movement, and we have many places where it is taught, workshops where people can learn it. I sometimes think to myself, if we have a dogma, it is nonviolent communication. I think it's a very problematic communication methodology, and lots of people have written both practical critiques and also moral critiques. For people who don't know anything about nonviolent communication, I guess one of the central things is that you're supposed to translate everything into a statement about how you feel and never really make a statement about... Right. So it's different people also teach it differently, right? So you can get people who teach in different ways. But one of the moral critiques that I've seen that resonates with me a lot, particularly in this moment, is that at least every time I've been to such a workshop, it is strongly discouraged for you to say something like, what you did was wrong.
Yes.
What you did was cruel. Like moral judgments about other people's behavior are discouraged. I think that very often shields abusers from consequences for their actions.
Yeah,
because the person who's the subject of the abuse is responsible for their own way of talking about it, but the abuser is not made responsible for their behaviors. And so that's something that's come up in our discussions as to whether we even want to teach the methodology anymore. And just very briefly on Ken Wilber, and then I'll talk. Ken Wilber is a crank. His ideas are non-scientific and silly.
Okay, so I would say that the rightness and wrongness thing that draws from Rosenberg's quote from Rumi, out beyond thoughts of right doing and wrong doing, there's a field, I'll meet you there. And this idea of transcending moralistic judgment is kind of key to making that transformation. And I struggled with it for a number of years, trying to figure out where he's coming from. And as a psychotherapist myself, I knew that shaming and blaming people is not a way to inspire them to better behavior. And so he experienced a lot of resolution of conflict over the many, many decades that he worked with people, warring tribes in Africa and warring couples even in relationships. And the idea is that you're getting a more accurate assessment when you focus on the needs that are not getting met, rather than who's right, who's wrong, or who's good and who's bad. So that's the non-sacrificial ethics that he promotes. And the proof is in the pudding. I think there's a lot of practitioners that overlook their own needs in their attempt to empathize with others. And that's the lopsided thing that you're pointing to, where people are not standing up for their own needs, not being sort of zealous advocates for getting needs met. It's just that we need to hold each other's needs with equal care if we're going to live together in a society. And I think a lot of the divisiveness that we see is a result of people having dysregulated limbic systems, where they're not able to really soothe themselves to the point to have rational inquiry with each other, to be curious about each other, what's going on for them, connecting on the level of needs that are universal in us rather than thoughts of right and wrong. That's at least where Rosenberg was coming from. And as far as Wilber goes, I have a lot of critiques of him as well. I'm doing a series with my friend Brad on a podcast about it. And I think there are some valuable elements of integration that he's offering, drawing on all kinds of disciplines throughout the world. And his view of mysticism is really interesting in terms of states of consciousness, the awareness that we have, this background awareness of ourselves and our behavior and our thoughts and so forth, and drawing on a lot of mystics throughout history who sort of overlapped in some ways with physicists. So it's a different sort of methodology than mythology. So mythical ideas that most religions are embedded in, as they're kind of stuck in the amber stage of thinking, where they're taking everything literally and promoting that in a divisive way, right? With a lot of punishment and a lot of sacrifice thrown into the mix. So yeah, I think there's just a lot to explore. And what are your thoughts about voluntarism, a society in which there's no coercion, where we treat each other in a voluntary fashion without systems of domination, governments, amber stage organizations?
Well, okay, so there's a ton of things that might be said here. So I think I'm just going to kind of move past the nonviolent communication stuff, because I said what I think about it, and there's lots of good critiques out there for people to read if people want to read examinations of the philosophy. I guess one thing I would say about it is that I don't think making moral judgments is a bad thing. I think making bad moral judgments is a bad thing. And that the resistance of many liberal-minded people to making moral judgments has been disastrous, right? It has really fucked up our culture profoundly, and that we have to get comfortable making moral judgments again. I actually don't want people to become less. It's not so, declaring behavior as right or wrong is not something we overcome. It's something we get good at. And I just think that the framework that suggests that that is some lower order stage of thinking is bollocks, basically. I think it's very misleading. In terms of, I have a number of friends who I worked with when I was back at Harvard, who are close to the Integral Institute and Ken Wilber, and who did a lot of work with him personally and with his institute. And I respect them as thinkers. And I think the reason why is they've taken elements of Wilber's framework and made them much more intellectually and scientifically rigorous. And that sometimes happens with thinkers like Wilber, who present a sort of meta theory about everything. People will latch onto it, and then they'll take pieces and they'll make those work. I don't think that saves Wilber's theory. His theory is a new age theory. And I think we have to be honest about it. It doesn't, the levels he talks about are not, they're not what human developmentalists like myself actually talk about scientifically when we speak about human development. It's not a respected model. It's unscientific. And so I think that we can do without Wilber. Maybe we can take some of the ideas and make something out of them, but I don't think that rescues him. I don't know what to say about voluntarism and a community without coercion. I think it sounds nice. I don't know what to say about it as a kind of viable
Yeah,
way.
that'd be really nice.
Yeah, I agree with that. There's a good interview I have out recently with John Vavicki, who's also done some work close with Ken, and also another thinker from the UK called, I'm gonna forget his name, Jonathan Rowson, who has done some stuff close to Ken Wilber's stuff on the podcast that I co-host called Lifefulness. So if you want to dig into some of the questions which are close to what it sounds like some of the things you're interested in, there's 2 episodes with Jonathan Rowson and John Vavicki. Vavicki
Excellent.
is
Thank you very
probably
much.
closer. Yeah. I told you I took ages to answer questions, so I can go as long as you like, but you have to get your questions in early.
I have a comment about voluntarism. It depends on what you volunteer for. You can volunteer for a good thing or a bad thing. So that's my comment. How good is voluntarism? Depends on what you're volunteering for.
I'm just curious, so a question of curiosity, James. What do you feel that the left, in being so open and non-judgmental, what are the elements? Well, maybe I'm asking an obvious question. So I was going to say, what do you see as that the area that we have gone wrong in not judging, but obviously we can see where this country has gone. So I think I've already answered my own question.
Well, I think
in that, yeah, we've taken.
No, but your question is really important, because I think that people. I've gone on a journey myself with this, and I sound more harsh to my own ears than I would have imagined a few years ago. Look at what happened in the media over the past few years as it tried to grapple with what Trump was doing and the way he spoke about reality and about the world. initially, and for many years this has been the case, primarily responding to Republican politicians, honestly, the desire has clearly been to try and find people on both sides of an argument, right? So you look at how they covered climate change for years. It was the people, the scientists who say climate change is happening and here's the evidence for it, and the cranks who said climate change is not happening because I believe it's not happening. Here's my bullshit evidence, right? And it's a well-known phenomenon within media. It's called contorting to balance, right? They try and prevent a illusion of balance on an issue because they think the most important thing is to be, quotes, balanced, right? And in so doing, they give credibility to a point of view which is nonsense, but they keep trying to find someone on the other side of every issue. And after many years, finally, the news networks have figured out that that's not their job. Our job is not to be perpetually balanced, right? That balance is not an inherent value. There's no inherent moral value in being balanced in your views. Truth is an inherent value. Justice is an inherent value, right? We should pursue those for their own sake, but balance is not. If you're trying to balance truth on one side and bullshit on the other side, you're in the wrong place. You should be over where the truth is. But they did it for so long that they poisoned this culture. And now, only now are they starting to delete the people on Twitter, even the major politicians who are spreading hate and bullshit, right? And I saw a really great example just this last couple of days where the president tweeted out, I won this election by a lot. I think it was on Facebook. And underneath it said that the election is predicted to be won by Joe Biden, right? Right underneath. That's exactly what they should have been doing for the last 20 or so years. Every time a Republican talking head came on and said, you know, climate change isn't happening, they should have said, we're just going to cut your mic there. Climate change is happening. It's real. What you're saying is false, you know. And I had an experience of this recently where I was at an event just this week, a belief dialogue, and a Catholic priest was talking about his views, and he talked about how he was a Trump supporter and how he thought that the Democrats were trying to perpetuate the largest voter fraud in history and usher in a one-party state. And I said, you are a liar, and you should be ashamed of yourself. How dare you as a priest besmirch your commitment to truth in this way? What do you have to say about the fact that as we're talking, the president is trying to steal the election? What is your moral judgment about that? He wouldn't even answer the question. He left the call. We cannot give these people the space to express their view. It's not worth trying to understand it because they've told us what it is, right? I understand his position. It's just false. It is a lie. And so we have to cauterize this. We have to cut it out of society. We have to win. And then we can start healing. People talk about healing after this election. You have to get rid of the disease before the wound can heal. And the disease has been festering in this culture for decades. Now, I don't know what exactly we need to do to get rid of the disease, but I sure as hell know that it isn't talking to people and trying to understand them. I tried that.
I have some
never
concerns.
Works. Good. Okay, good. I'm trying to express the strongest version of my view to provoke your concerns.
I'm going to consolidate some of what you said earlier with my question, especially the part about you alluding to punishment. And I want to say that, you know, I think it's important that people not be vigilantes. I think it's important that people follow the rule of law. I think it's important that you acknowledge, and thank you for acknowledging that you don't have the answers in terms of what to do, but you want to cut out these point of views. What I'm concerned about is evidence. And the way we evaluate evidence and what people think of as evidence, I can tell you that what you think of as evidence that is supported on Facebook is very different than a course of evidence that you would get in a law school class, and or what somebody would use in a courtroom. And I think that people get very, very emotive. And I think there's, as much as you don't like a point of view, or you don't like even a nonsensical point of view, even a harmful point of view, I think the harm in cutting them out and not hearing them at all in being so stigmatizing and being so prejudicial is extremely dangerous, especially if you're not defining what it is you want to cut out, except that you don't like it and you pronounce it as nonsense. I think there has to be a methodology, which is why I started asking, I was asking about, what is the methodology for getting along with people we don't like? I think, similarly, there has to be a methodology in terms of determining what's going to get censored, what's going to be permitted speech, what's going to be a permitted tweet. And it has to be something other than consensus. Because if it goes to consensus, we thought that the world was flat. We thought a whole bunch of things. We also had the skeptic community and skeptic leaders saying that climate change was not real. And they changed their mind. And if that happened today, I don't know that we would get at the truth methodologically, because they would, the comments, or the opposition would be stifled. It would merely be pronounced as a falsehood. So I hope we go carefully and tread lightly.
So I'm really glad you said that, because one of the reasons why I'm stating my position so strongly is to provoke thoughts and feelings in you, right? I think that it's good to have a strong statement of a view, and then we can talk about whether it's really the right position to take. I agree that we will need a methodology, right? And that you're basically raising some epistemic questions about how do we, if we are going to stand for the truth, how do we know what truth is, right? And how do we protect the truth in the best possible way that's actually effective? I think these are really great questions. What I want people to do is question their assumption that what we do in the face of rampant falsehoods, for instance, is try and get everyone around the table and talk it out and build relationships and be nice to each other. But I want to shake people's assumption that that is going to work, because I have not seen much evidence that it does. I mean, both scientific evidence and also evidence from my own experience trying to do that work. I actually don't think that functions. I think that way of approaching politics in particular is a reflection of a fallacy that I have recently tried to characterize, and this is the best I've come up with to characterize it, which is the assumption that our interpersonal ethics will create a society that reflects those interpersonal ethics, right? That if we treat each other kindly and nicely and respectfully interpersonally, then we will have a society and a political culture that is nice and kind and respectful. I think that's many people's basic assumption about how this works. So I treat my neighbor nicely, even though they, support Trump or whatever, or I treat my friends nicely, even though they're huge racists, because if I show them enormous respect and deference and what have you, then the culture will reflect that. I think that is just false. I think that is a mistake. I think it is a understandable mistake because people are simply extrapolating from their personal experience, but I think it is a mistake. I want to say too, I totally agree with you. When I use words like punishment, cut out things like, I think people hear things that I do not want. I do not think that we should actually censor people in terms of government censorship of speech, except maybe hate speech. I'm okay with that, but I'm a European. We already do that. In Europe, it seems to work fine. I don't think that when I say punish, I don't mean vigilante like violence. What I mean is a community response that says that behavior is outside the moral norms of our community, right? However we do that, I think we have to do that. Great tweet I saw today of someone works in DC overhearing some soon to be former Trump administration staff people saying, "Oh, I really hope they don't. I really hope there isn't some pushback on us from being in this administration. That would be so unfair." And I'm like, no, you chose to make money out of lying to people, putting kids in cages. It'd be perfect. The only just thing to do is for you to become a pariah, right? And you know that what is not going to happen is that, right? We know what's going to happen. The Kennedy School, where I taught classes, the Harvard Kennedy School, is going to welcome these people in. They're going to have fucking forums with them. They're going to give them awards, aren't they? We just know that they are. They're already going to start the lecture courses, right? And it's going to be Steve Bannon talking about how he won an election. And I just don't want that to happen, because that normalizes and rewards the behavior that is evil and wicked. We need to actually take a moral stand. Otherwise, what are they going to take from us next? They've already taken the public culture from us. Like, it's already filled with lies and misinformation and conspiracy theories. Right? They're trying to steal the election even now. Like, at what point are you going to get angry about this and say, no more? You don't get to take any more from me. Where is your self-respect? That's what I want to ask people who still want to kumbaya this moment. Do you have any self-respect? Do you have any respect for your country? At what point are you going to stand up and say, no, you don't get to take anything more from me and from my community?
Can I make a comment?
Of course, I'm just going off now. I'm just
Okay. So you made a statement that Trump is trying to steal the election. That is your opinion.
No, it is a fact, Jim.
Oh, no, that's not a fact. He's trying to steal it.
Yeah.
Okay, that's what you think. Now,
no, it is what's happening.
There is going to be a legal ruling on what is a valid ballot or not. And that's going to be adjudicated, and there will be a legal winner according to the laws. And if Trump shows that there's so much fraud that it changes the whole outset, he's not stealing it. He's proven his point that there was too much fraud. It was not a legal election, but at least he will come up with the idea that every vote counts, and what is a legal vote, there'll be no discrimination of what is not legal, what is legal. You can have a consensus, because the laws, we're going by law and order, there will be a winner, and it won't be up to subjective evaluation. It'll be up to, actually mathematical thinking on the laws. So that's my comment. You can't just say he's stealing the election, because you can't prove he's stealing it. You just think he's stealing it.
So here's why I disagree with you. Although I agree, I want to say where I agree first. We should follow the laws regarding the election, and if there are irregularities, we should find out what those are, and we should take the appropriate action in response to that. And if it turns out that there has been voter fraud or people stopped going to the polls, what have you, then appropriate legal responses should be taken. Absolutely, we should follow every law. Here is why I judge from my view of the evidence. This is mathematical thinking, Jim. Okay. That what is happening is not a good faith attempt to make sure that the laws of this country vis-a-vis elections are followed. One, the president said he would not necessarily honor the results of the election if he was voted out of office. He said it himself twice, right? But secondly, let me answer, and then you can take it back. You can say the response. I'm just going to lay out the pieces of evidence. Secondly, he is currently supporting supporters of his who are outside some voting locations chanting "count the votes," and other voting locations chanting "stop the count," right? That is fundamentally cynical and inconsistent. If his view was that we should count all the votes and see who the winner is, he would not be supporting people who are saying "stop the count" in places where he thinks more people will vote for his opponent, right? Thirdly, almost every single one of these legal attempts so far have been thrown out as completely absurd. Fourthly, he has repeatedly lied about the pervasiveness of ballots that were being cast by people who are not real, fraudulent ballots, the safety of postal voting. Essentially, he has been delegitimizing the election process since he was elected. On almost day one, he started saying these things. All those things put together make me think the evidence is quite clear. He does not respect the legal process of this election. He wants to win the election regardless of whether he got the votes of the American people or not.
Response. Lately, he said he would abide by the legal decision. that's what he's going to have to do, whether he likes it or not. And not talking about the other side, all the stuff they did to try to win by hook or crook, all the lies has been going on both sides, all against Trump. So it's been a fight, and there hasn't been, rational thinking about the whole deal. And so that's what will be determined by people that can analyze and who is doing the irrational or mathematical thinking. And there has to be laws set up how you deal with each other. That's what they did in the American Revolution, having a constitution and set up so there's checks and balances. That's an attempt to have a society that can deal voluntarily. It hasn't been successful because people have been trying to destroy that from the beginning. It's an ongoing fight. So that's all I'm saying. Wait and see what the scientific evidence is before you make judgments that he's a crook, he's trying to steal it. But the other side is doing the same damn thing. They're trying to steal it, and who's right? It depends on reality. Who's right?
I think that this is a really good example of some of the challenges that I've been talking about, right? I think the evidence is there. I think it's really very clear. I think anybody who wants to look at the evidence for themselves can judge, who's acting in good faith and who's acting in bad faith. And just to get back to the question earlier about moral judgments, this is why this is important. This is why we don't give up making moral judgments, right? Because we have contested situations where we have to choose, right? We have to choose because we have to act. And so the skill of being a human being is not transcending the judgments we have to make. It's becoming better judges. And I really worry when people conflate making wise judgments with judgmentalism, because those two things are not the same.
So people are making judgments on Biden, the stuff he's done in the past, all this stuff. Is he corrupt or not corrupt? And that'll play out in the lawsuits or whatever. And then you can make a judgment, because we don't really know the facts. Nobody knows all the facts until it comes out, and through the legal process, whatever.
Well, I think we need to prioritize. I think we need to prioritize what we're going to make our judgments on, and who we're going to judge. I don't need to say judgment, but how we're going to make decisions about and prioritize where we take action. Right now, the action, as of yesterday, as of this past week, was to get the fascists out of office. That was our priority. And then we can start looking at some of the other political leaders and how to hold them accountable, how to put better political leaders in office, those who are trustworthy, those who have some kind of moral fiber to their character. We got the fascists out of office.
Okay, and you put in a new fascist. Where have you gotten?
No, it's not the same.
Well,
There's no equivalency.
Yeah,
no equivalency.
Right. And so this is what we have to confront, right? The idea that there's basically no differences between anything, right? That everything is the same as everything else, and that's what you get when you're unwilling to make moral and intellectual judgments.
I think what's happened this entire election and this entire fiasco that we are witnessing is really, and the pandemic as well, is an opportunity for us to really reflect on our own society and realize that there's a pathology here of lack of empathy that permeates all of the entire society, all of American culture. And we need to learn how to look within and address that and emerge from this better people in general. So that's all I have to say.
I just had, I wanted to relate Coral's first comments back to the conversation that we were having. And in particular, I just don't feel like I had a clear idea of the Ethical Society's stance on advocating for and being activists for maintaining secularism. And I feel like I need to state that in the last Women's conversation that we had, secular women's conversation, and secular sisters, the most important thing that the small group of us could come up with in terms of what we would do to set boundaries and protect women in particular, because I feel like that's a pretty universal thing, but any sort of group that has been othered or a minority group, is to put in place very strong secular protection. And I find that it's kind of an umbrella that really does like cover all of these particular issues and abuses. And yeah, I just feel like it's very important. It's kind of one of those things where I'm not going to back down on it anymore. And just interested in what thoughts are on that, because people often just let it slide and they're just like, okay, you know, whatever you believe, etc. But when we talk about particular religious groups and their patriarchal just history and current abuses of women, like that is upsetting.
Oh, that's a great question. We are totally 100% supportive of maintaining incredibly clear boundaries between church and state, and one of the most committed groups of activists in our community. And just to give people a picture, I don't think that I said we have about 400 pledging members, right? So that's about how big the community is who commit to our, so we're quite a large congregation, and massive by humanist group standards. One of the biggest subgroups within that is our committed secularists group, who work with the local, with the Secular Coalition for America, with Americans United for Separation of Church and State. I myself very frequently go to the State House in Missouri to speak against some ridiculous law that they have tried to pass that breaches the wall of separation between church and state. And we're very, very strict about that, to the point where I directed, Missouri recently ruled that religious organizations, and legally speaking, we are a religious organization, so we're governed by the same rules, are allowed to take certain state funding on the same basis as secular institutions to do things like repair their playgrounds and stuff like that. So if you have a playground in your church campus, you can take federal funding on the same basis as secular schools could. And our nursery school was going to apply to it. And I said, no, you can't have that money. That's government money. It should not be given to an organization like us. We don't believe in that. So we have rather frequently foregone benefits which we could have enjoyed because we are opposed in principle to the entanglement of church and state.
I think that's exceptional. And what James is referring to, there was a Supreme Court case a couple of years ago, Trinity Lutheran versus
Trinity Lutheran,
the state of Missouri. And it's where a Lutheran school wanted to have access to state funds so they could refurbish the ground of their playground so the kids wouldn't get hurt. And there was a big argument at the Supreme Court over, well, it's just a playground, it's attached to the building, but the purpose of that building is to proselytize. And what the court has done, the court has exceedingly it's obfuscated a lot of these clear-cut issues that in the past would have been, well, this is the government, it's an establishment clause violation because this is the government advancing a religious organization. But my comment from earlier, and I apologize, I've been a little bit quiet today. I think I'm coming down with a migraine. Usually I don't flub the beginning humanist sermon, but what I wanted to say earlier, and James said it so eloquently, we need an ethic, a religious duty to truth. And I heard Ayn Rand being brought up, and I heard about volunteerism, but when it comes right down to it, and reason for ethical culture societies is because we are a social species and we need each other so we can learn and we can reflect ethics from each other. And where I was going earlier when I was trying to talk, but like I said, I apologize, migraine is coming on. The fact of the matter is, in humanism, we need to understand each other. We need to understand each other so we can work with each other, that's not necessarily endorsing what other people are saying, but we need to understand with what we're working with other people. And of course, there's two levels. You have the political charlatans that are leading their flocks, and the way they're leading their flocks can be incredibly predatory and abusive. Just look at exactly how religious liberty legislation is being touted and people are supporting it to allow people to violate and just sidestep established civil rights law and policy. And it hurts people. And the thing is that we need an ethic of truth. Additionally, here's how people operate. We're not individuals. We are constituent elements of a greater social organism. How people think politically is they know who they can trust. It doesn't matter if there's mendacity or veracity behind it. People know who they can trust. They get a feeling behind it, then they calculate backwards. So it's contingent upon us to have the better message, to be the visible person that you know that you can trust. Because when it comes down to it, we all have the same values of fairness, but there are those of us who have moved beyond the basic stages of moral development. There's a guy by the name of Larry Kohlberg who wrote a book on the 3 stages of moral development: pre-conventional, conventional, post-conventional. And the aspect of the virtue of fairness, you'll hear conservatives and progressives talking about fairness. What a pre-conventional level of moral development would say, hey, this isn't fair. It's like you're doing a trick with a dog, 2 dogs, an experiment that you can do. You take 2 pieces of cucumber, 2 pieces of sausage, you give one dog the cucumber, you give the other dog sausage to perform the same trick. That dog is thinking, hey, they're getting an easier time than I am, so this isn't fair, so I'm not going to do it. Why should I have to do it if other people aren't going to do that? But then you get the next level of post-conventional morality when you think to yourself, hey, it's not, let's think about the fairness that's involved with other people. The fairness that's involved with other people. Do they have a fair shake in this life? I don't. It's like that saying, was it Mark Twain who said, I don't want to go to heaven if other people can't get in there. And the other thing about ethical culture that I love is where Felix Adler went into the golden rule. And he talked about how the golden rule causes you to post your expectations on others. So you're not thinking about other people, you're thinking about yourself. And we need great ethical leadership in this country to say we can't just think about ourselves alone. We have to understand that other people are doing it, why they're doing it, but we need great ethical leadership that's pro-social, that's not tribal, that's not insular and exclusionary. We need an ethical leadership that looks at it. And yes, the whole thing about kids with cages got brought up. And in our politics, there are a lot of us who didn't like Joe Biden, but he was the lesser of 2 evils. You can look at the exit polls on this, and I'll wrap this up in just a moment. You can look at the exit polls. Why did people vote for Trump? Because they wanted Trump. Why did 67% of the country who voted for Joe Biden vote for Joe Biden? Because they didn't want Donald Trump. We need to think about our ethical principles of fairness. We need to think about our ethical principles of considering other people, of altruism, of understanding, and the fact that even if we find other people obnoxious and we stand up to them, we have to bring them along with us, because what's going to happen, honestly, is even if Joe Biden is in there, things don't always improve. We look at the Obama administration. How many people did Obama, how many whistleblowers did Obama prosecute? So for an ethical perspective, we have to think about, we have to struggle and fight as humanists and ethical culturists for universal health care, for campaign finance reform, and for human dignity. No more kids in cages, no more mass deportations, and also for a country that stands up for the human rights of others. No more forced enslaved labor in Xinjiang province in China. And lastly, for people out there looking and seeking truth, where we have dictators calling for the assassination of reporters. And we need strong ethical leadership that takes into account other people and a universal set of humanistic ethics, and ethical culture does such a fantastic job of that. There you go.
Wow, thanks. That's a lot of things that we do right. I don't know how well I do all those things on a daily basis.
Well, we're only
We certainly try to do at least some of them. Folks, I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to listen to what I have to say. I enjoyed this conversation. I hope it at least provoked you to think about what I had to say. I think it would be fun to follow up some of these conversations. I think, Wes, you and I could have a really interesting, more intense and private conversation about some of the stuff you raised, because I think there's a lot in there that I need to think about too. And I appreciate everybody who shared and asked questions today. So thank you for being here.
Let's give James a warm San Diego round of applause and thank him for coming here today. He was so generous with his time.
Is it warm in San Diego right now?
Windy and cold and rainy, and it's wonderful.
Oh, I'm jealous.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Oh,
Yeah,
I'm going to walk my puppy. Have a great day. And if you want to,
Thank you.
I'll put my email address in the chat.
Yes,
So
please.
if anyone wants to get in touch or find more about the Ethical Society or a program, programs, they're all open to everyone. They're all free and they're all online right now. So you can come to all of them if you want.
Yay.
That's my email. Thanks,
And wait,
everyone.
one last question. How can we
Oh,
get ethical culture in San Diego? Because there's not currently ethical culture in San
That's
Diego.
easy. If you want to start an ethical society, just send me an email and I'll tell you the process.
Let's do it.
James, there's an ethical society in Los Angeles, but I don't know how active or how important, now that everything is Zoom, how important is location? Is it really relevant? Would it make more sense for me to join the Ethical Society of St. Louis rather than LA?
Well, we definitely will be continuing at least some of our online programming after we reopen to be back in person, but we won't continue to do everything online like we're doing now.
Yeah,
and I think there is something lost a bit when people are not together for real. But having said that, our Sunday morning programs are really freaking great. We've gotten very good at doing them. So if you want to check it out, please come along sometime.
Okay, Sunday morning, what time?
11 Central.
Central, thank you. Okay.
Cool. Thanks, everybody. Have a good day.
Thank you so
Bye-bye.
much.
thank you.